So we have wrapped up season one. Well, in fact, this is part of the wrap up because this is a bonus episode. It's the new year, and we want to take a little bit of time to reflect about what we've done and freeform a little bit. You and I kind of have a little bit of a structure to these things, which I think is helpful. But I think we want to just also just have some fun chatting through what we did.
Yeah. Well, Happy New Year, first and foremost. It was eventful for us, so I'm fresh back from my third round of a virus, so I'm a little hoarse, but I'm going to get through the freeform here. So what did you see this season as far as some victories as you kind of look through what we've done?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things for me is that we actually did it, right? I mean, a lot of people, you and I included, talk about doing stuff.
Right.
But to actually do it, spend the time, get it out there in the ether, like that's a little bit scary, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, who's going to listen to this? What they're going to think? So I'm happy that we did it, and I'm happy that we're continuing on. And I want to kind of orient people to, maybe you haven't listened to the episodes, but basically there were a few different things we did as far as the format of it. We had, I would say, there's 4 episodes more on like the construct of tension. So episodes 1, 2, and 3 were all about the intro, the origins, and the layers of tension, which the layers of tension, I really like that conversation.
That was my favorite by far, yeah.
Yeah, I think you did too. And then actually one of my favorites too was the last one, episode 9, about how to apply surrender. But anyway, those 4 are kind of what I'd call constructs of tension type episodes, where this connects to some, my ultimate desire is to get into a book, and so
Mm-hmm.
this is the type of stuff that gives framework and shape to it.
There was some really fun stuff and really profound stuff in those construct episodes. I really, I said it. My favorite was the layers, but I really was, and I really enjoyed the conversation about the origins of tension in Genesis. That was fascinating, and I could have spent some more time there.
Yeah,
that was a pretty neat discussion.
I agree. I mean, I you know me, Rob. Those are the ones that kind of get me going, because it's what eliminates it from a random conversation to something like, hey, this connects. Like, God's a God of order, and whenever I see some kind of glimpses of that order, and I just really like that.
Right.
And then we did one biblical tension, like faith first works, right? That was episode 4. And that was, just kind of a classic when we got out there. And then we also did some biblical stories of David and Solomon. I actually, episode 6 and 7, I actually liked those. I liked getting into the stories of these men and kind of putting them both under the microscope a little bit. I really liked that. I don't know what you thought.
Yeah, no, I did enjoy that, and I actually think the episode on David gets the title of the season award. An adulterous murderer after God's own heart. I thought that was probably the best tension title we came up with.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then finally, to round it out, we did 2 what I'm calling contemporary tensions. So episode 6 was about politics. Episode 8 was about parenting. And those were interesting to me, because I think we probably got more comments about those in terms of like people, I think it ruffles feathers is one thing, because people have strong opinions on those.
Do you think people wanted more of that or less of that?
I think some wanted more, some wanted less.
Yeah.
Some don't. It's kind of like the tension we were talking about. Some people are apathetic about it. Some are like gung-ho about it.
You're never going to go as deep as the people who, want you to go deep on, and you're never going to, make everybody, you're not going to say things that make everybody happy on either side of those issues.
Well, and the other, I think, practical issue is like, we try to keep this to a half hour, and trying to tackle those things in a half hour. You're not gonna go after it all, right? I mean, there are shows that dedicate themselves.
Well, the American church and politics, you can cover that in 30 minutes. It's easy.
I mean, seriously, there are shows that talk about
Oh,
only
absolutely.
parenting, only politics.
Only politics for hours at a time.
And that was not our goal. We didn't
No.
want to be another one of those. But we talk about all that to kind of orient you to it, but also kind of where we want to go at the end of this podcast is talk about the future. But before that, I wanted to reflect a little bit, and I think this is kind of neat, Rob, is to talk about like some of the analytics. You can look at the analytics on the podcast to see who's listening, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, fascinating.
So again, we've been doing this for about 3 months, and some of that is just kind of us being honestly stagnant, just kind of seeing. Like we weren't in the studio, we were just listening to see who was listening. But we had people listening in 6 different countries, which kind of blows me away a little bit. Most of the audience is in kind of our neck of the woods in Tennessee, Georgia. But I think what was one maybe really cool is that there are also like the count is 23 different states. And so, and all over, like from the East Coast, New Jersey, in the middle, Iowa, to the West, Wyoming, California, and even Hawaii. Like someone in Hawaii is listening in. So that was just kind of neat to see. And so it'll be interesting to see where that expands in the future. As far as don't have solid gender numbers. That just has to do with kind of the analytical platforms you can tap into. But it does appear like most of our audience is kind of in their 40s, 50s range, some 30s.
Well, and if you remember, that was our target audience. So
Yes.
we really wanted to reach those people. Our thoughts were that was a group of people where tensions were a real part of their daily life.
Exactly. I mean, when you're in your 20s, you do have tensions, but I don't think you're seeking to kind of.
You're not looking to see what those tensions are showing you.
Exactly.
I think when you're in your 40s and 50s, you're reflecting on the first part of your life and trying to figure out what the tensions in your life are telling you. So I think that's great that the analytics sort of support what we had intended.
Exactly. No, I totally agree with you on that. And then just to round out the analytics here, the top 3 episodes in order were, as far as how many listens, were parenting, episode 8. Second was the attention intro, so people wanted to know what we were talking about, like what is this topic. And then third was applied surrender, which is our latest release. Some of that has to do with the order of how we put this out. But I don't know, what's your take on those being the top 3?
Well, I think that episode 9, which was recorded late and released late, is good. It suggests that as we produced a little more content, that there were actually people out there that wanted to listen. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, it is encouraging, and I kind of am interested in what happens after we drop this bonus, right? Like, do people listen in on it? So another just final part on this, just kind of reflecting stage, is we actually put out a survey to people that we know to fill it out and ask. There was 9 questions, and we had them just comment. Basically, some of it was like just demographic information. Who are you? How old are you? That kind of stuff. But then, what did you like? What didn't you like? What would you recommend? One of the funniest comments that we heard, and I'll just quote it, was, more controversy would be helpful. Lots of tension should be present in the conversations. Yelling might help.
Well, see, that might have been me. I could have maybe had given that feedback. So
yeah, that's what I was like. Rob, did you do this?
That might have been me. So
I was just trying to imagine you and I yelling at each other on this. That would be interesting.
Well, I mean, it would be tense. You summarized the feedback into some useful categories, and so you kind of suggested that the two major themes that emerged were including some guests, particularly ones knowledgeable in certain areas, and then two, maybe going a little deeper on some tensions. So what are your thoughts on that feedback?
Yeah, I mean, a few people said that, and so that's how we captured it. I think some of that is probably a reflection of what they've heard in other podcasts. I am a fan of guests. I think the thing I would take from that is I don't think I think it'd be nice to have knowledgeable guests, but I don't think it necessarily has to be like an expert. I think it can, I'm also kind of interested in just hearing the individual stories of people. I think stories are powerful. I mean, that
People are experts on their own tensions.
exactly, exactly. They don't need to be. That's a good way of saying it. They don't need to be declared experts by
Right.
someone else or popular in that regard. I
Right.
think people's stories are very, very powerful. I mean, a lot of times the people that have gone through the most never have a platform. Stories have a way of going deeper. I mean, I'm not opposed to like doing multiple episodes on a topic, but I think stories have a way of cutting through. I mean, look, there's a reason why Jesus spoke in story. There's something, we've been wired in a certain way where stories just attract us. I mean, like you and I were talking off air, and I started to tell you about a story I heard in another podcast. And you instantly, I saw you engaged, like,
Right.
oh, I want to hear
Yeah.
this story.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan of stories, and that concept has just kind of been, I think, something I'd like to pursue. Do you think there was anything left unsaid? Like on any of the episodes, did you come back and say, oh man, I wish I just would have said this? Or, I mean, did you have any feeling like that? Or, even a favorite episode, anything, you can take it where you want.
Well, I absolutely had a favorite episode. The 3 layers of tension is when I really started to engage this idea of what the tension, the layers of tension, and what tension can reveal in my own heart. And it was funny because, in prep for that episode, I had read through, all of the things that we wanted to cover, and it made sense in my head. But as we were talking through it, it really impacted my heart. And I really could start to almost do a deep dive internally of what some of the external tensions in my life were revealing. And then I could see a path to how I could go much deeper and actually reflect on what God was trying to show me about my own life. It was a time when a conversation in a podcast actually became deeply personal and internal, off air.
Well, look, I mean, tension is a gray topic. It always will be. And I don't think it's going to be something that we can put a bow on really quickly and resolve very quickly. In fact, I don't think that's at all how God works. I wish he did. Sometimes I'm like, here's the problem. Let's go to business. Let's get this out. But things take years. And I think part of this is, you consume these things, consume the podcast, but reflect on them. Take time to reflect. I think our culture today, and I'm just as guilty, right? It's like, hey, I have a half hour to go to here. What can I listen to in a half hour? And then jump to the next thing, and I don't process. One of our goals, I think, here is to have people process what this actually really means, because if you don't do that, you're never going to get to a practical step of application, right? I mean, some of that requires thinking about it, but also talking about it with other people.
Yeah, you say something very interesting there and suggesting that things take time. Patience is a very difficult thing when you're in a tension. I mean, that's one of the things that obviously we all learn in life, is that when things are hard, we do want immediate resolution. and yet that may not be God's plan. God may be trying to show us something in the waiting.
Yeah, no, I think it's like I got this image of like you're in a pressure cooker when the tension is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think God wants us to learn patience and perseverance, and which builds character ultimately. I mean, that's what we're saying. If you don't let God work in your life to say, why do I keep, we've talked about markers a lot.
Yeah.
If we don't examine those markers, guess what? Our character doesn't grow because we're not listening to what God wants us to do in our life. So any other final thoughts, things you'd want to say about season 1 as we're kind of packing it up?
Well, in the exact vein that we just were talking about, I would say that there is not one aspect of my personal life right now that doesn't have a tension in it that is probably something that will be tense for some time to come.
Yeah. Yeah, you've been put in a pressure cooker. It's like ever since we started this podcast,
Yeah.
you got put in there.
Right. I mean, it's there. I mean, there is a lot of room now, and you caught me on this in sort of planning for the episode. You kind of said, "Hey, are you processing through any of this in the vein of what we talked about in some of the early episodes of the constructs of tension?" And the honest answer is no. I mean, I haven't even had time to process, but I'm thankful for the constructs because it does provide for a way to think through some of the specific issues of tension in my own life. So it's been a very personal, topic to cover in this season.
I think in some ways this is therapeutic talking about it. And so let's transition kind of into where we're going in the future. And I think this whole concept of guests, that's like real people, real struggles, real solutions. I wanna explore, and we're not necessarily locked into this, or I think we can do. We can shift as we go along, but I think I would like to connect some tension stories that people tell to some of these principles or constructs, so that people do have meaningful answers. But where I'm going with that is, I think having people in here and actually saying, hey, how does you got an awesome story of tension, right? But how does that align to these 3 layers of tension? Like essentially, are you going into the deeper core to examine what God may be telling you? I honestly think that could be eye-opening, therapeutic. I don't know, fill in the blank, right? And I hope that happens.
I don't know what it would bring up in some conversations. It would. We might have to have some tissues on the table or something. I mean, it could bring up some pretty deep things for certain people if they really dive into what these markers are showing them about what God is working on in their lives.
How do you think people will do trying to connect it to a construct? Do you think that's where it's going to kind of be strange for them when they're talking about something personal, and then we're trying to put it into this framework? Or do you think they'll? What do you think?
This may be an area where the deeper dive feedback comes into play. I mean, it may take 2 episodes for us to get to the root of some of these tensions that people bring up.
Yeah.
I mean, it may require a conversation and then sort of a reflection on the conversation.
Well, what else are you looking kind of going forward into season 2? I mean, what are your hopes or anticipation for it beyond sort of the stories? Is there anything else you kind of had in mind?
I think more processing instead of just theories or constructs. We're starting to see how it plugs in to real lives. So, you mentioned real people, real struggles, real solutions. So I think that rawness, that realness is what I am excited to unpack.
Yeah, and I'm kind of, we talked about this a little bit too. Instead of like maybe defining what attention is and saying who could be good for that, maybe talking with people first and saying, what do you think God's really like, telling them what tension is, and then say, how do you think, what big tension or story do you have in your life, and seeing what people say, and then seeing where we go with that. I think that's also it's kind of like backing into what is the tension, right? I mean, that's kind of what we did with like David and Solomon. We looked at their lives and heard their story like through the biblical text and said, what tension do we draw out of that? So I'm kind of excited about that exploration too. I think that'll be fun.
Yeah, I think any individual can benefit from processing from the level of a marker of tension, just an external tension, all the way into that deep spiritual tension. I think almost anybody, you could probably find a random person walking down the street and ask them to go through the exercise, and I think it would be a meaningful process for them.
I agree. I mean, look, if that helps the guests or people listening to do their processing, like that's what you and I were talking about. That's the goal.
Oh yeah, would that be an interesting episode to just randomly find someone on the street and ask them, what some external tension is in their life, and then have them deep dive on it?
Hey, just come in here for a second.
Man on the street.
Yeah, like he comes in and he's like, yeah, don't worry about the mics. Just tell us about what's going on.
I don't know. That would be an interesting one.
That would.
But I really do think anybody could benefit from, looking at what the external tensions are in their life and kind of analyzing what it's showing them.
All right, so let's wrap it up. I mean, I'm excited to go into season 2, and I'll put this out there again. We have an email address. It's no spaces, a world intention @gmail.com, and I'm putting that out there because if something's resonating with you, or like you have feedback, something you really liked, or hey, it'd be cool to hear about this, or hey, I have an awesome story of tension, write us. I mean, we're open to see what God may have and how He may work. So, it's always good to hear. It's just good to see what God could do.
Yeah, I'm excited about season 2. It's going to be fun to see what God does with it.
I agree. All right. Until next time, thank you for joining us on A World in Tension.